You think you know René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, the man who said the four most famous words in Western thought? But what if I told you that 24 hours before he wrote, "I think, therefore I am," he was sitting alone in a rented room in the Dutch countryside, terrified that the Catholic Church would burn him alive for what he was about to publish, that he'd already spent 4 years hiding a manuscript that could have gotten him executed, that the very moment he decided to commit those words to paper came after nearly 2 decades of running, hiding, and doubting everything he'd ever been taught. This isn't the story of a genius having a flash of insight. This is the story of a man who had to destroy his entire worldview, brick by brick, just to find one single thing he could trust, and the process nearly killed him. If you value documented philosophy and intellectual history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Stanford Encyclopedia, a philosophy's complete entry on Descartes, written by specialist scholars Kurt Smith and Gary Hatfield, published and updated through 2024 dollars. And from Adrien Bayet's 1791 biography, La Vie de Monsieur Descartes, the first comprehensive account based on Descartes, original letters and manuscripts. Now back to the information. March 31st, 1596, La Haye. In the Touraine region of France, a baby boy is born in his grandmother's house. His name is René. His mother, Jeanne Brochard, is dying. She'll be dead within 13 months, along with the infant she was carrying when René was born. The baby survives, but barely. He's pale. He has a persistent cough, likely tuberculosis, inherited from his mother. His father Joachim, a lawyer and counselor in the Parliament of Brittany, is away at Rennes. He won't be coming back to raise the children. René and his 2 older siblings stay with their grandmother in La Haye. The boy is sickly enough that people don't expect him to reach adulthood. 1506 or 1507, René, now 10 or 11 years old, enters the Jesuit College of La Flèche in Anjou. 1,200 young men train there for careers in military engineering, the judiciary, and government administration. The curriculum is brutal. 5 or 6 years of grammar school, Latin and Greek grammar, classical poets, Cicero, then 3 years of philosophy, logic, morals, physics, metaphysics, all of it based on Aristotle, taught through textbooks and commentaries. The Jesuits also include mathematics in the final 3 years. But here's the thing that changes everything. René's health is so poor that his teachers allow him to stay in bed until late morning. He doesn't have to rise at 5 a.m. with the other boys for morning prayers. He can sleep until nearly noon. This habit, developed because his body is failing him, will become the foundation of his entire intellectual life. Those late morning hours in bed become his thinking time, his meditation time. The space where his mind wanders through what he'll later call enchanted palaces. He stays at La Flèche until 1514 or 1515, 8 years of the most rigorous education available in France at the time. And what does he think of it? He's frustrated, deeply frustrated. He writes later in his discourse on the method, "As soon as I had completed the course of study at the end of which one is normally admitted to the ranks of the learned, I completely changed my opinion. For I found myself beset by so many doubts and errors that I came to think I had gained nothing from my attempts to become educated, but increasing recognition of my ignorance. The Jesuits taught him everything their tradition had to offer. And Descartes walked away thinking none of it was certain. None of it was knowledge. It was just sophisticated opinion piled on top of more sophisticated opinion. But mathematics was different. He marvels at it. The certainty, the necessity, the precision. 2 and 3 together always form 5. The square can never have more than 4 sides. This isn't opinion, this is truth. The question that begins to gnaw at him, how can he find a basis for all knowledge so that it might have the same unity and certainty as mathematics? 1516. Descartes earns his law degree from the University of Poitiers, as his father wants. He's 20 years old, but he has no intention of practicing law. The minimum age for entering Parliament is 27 anyway. He has 7 years to figure out what he actually wants to do with his life. So he does something strange. He decides to take up what he calls the Book of the World. In 1518, he travels to the Netherlands and becomes a volunteer for the army of Maurice of Nassau. Not to fight, there's no real evidence Descartes ever saw combat. He joins to travel, to see things, to meet people with different temperaments and ranks, to test himself in situations which fortune affords him. While stationed at Breda in the Netherlands, he meets Isaac Beeckman, a mathematician. This relationship rekindles Descartes' intense interest in the sciences. Beeckman poses mathematical problems. Descartes solves them. He writes Beeckman a treatise on music as a New Year's gift, attempting to express harmony in mathematical terms. The friendship is formative. Beekman shows Descartes that mathematics isn't just about abstract symbols. It can be applied to understand the physical world. But Descartes will later downplay Beekman's influence, even accuse him of plagiarism. The ego of a genius is a fragile thing. November 10th, 1619. The night that changes everything. Descartes is 23 years old. He's serving in the army of the Duke of Bavaria now, the Catholic side of what will become the 30 Years' War. Winter is setting in. He's stationed near Ulm in Germany. The cold is brutal. Europe is in the middle of what historians call the Little Ice Age. Descartes finds quarters in a house with a local inhabitant. He has a room heated by a pole. That's French for stove. Not that he's inside the stove itself, though some translations make it sound that way. He's in a room heated by a large ceramic masonry heater, a technology that had become common in Central Europe since around 1557. The room is warm while outside the temperature plunges. Freezing rain smashes against windows. Wind tears through streets. Descartes spends the entire day shut up alone in this stove-heated room. No company, no conversation, no distractions, just his own thoughts. He's been meditating on the disunity and uncertainty of his knowledge, all those years at La Flèche, learning Aristotelian philosophy, and he can't be certain any of it is true. How can he find a method that will discover knowledge, not simply confirm it? How can he bring all the sciences together within the context of a new universal philosophical wisdom? That night, he has 3 dreams. The first dream, he's being revolved by a whirlwind, terrified by phantoms. He feels like he's falling constantly. He imagines he'll be presented with a melon from a far-off land. The wind dies down. He wakes up. Second dream, thunderclaps, sparks flying around his room. He opens his eyes and sees the glittering sparks from the stove, but he calms himself because he remembers seeing this happen before while awake. Third dream, everything is quiet and contemplative. An anthology of poetry lies on his table. He opens it at random and reads a verse from Ausonius, Quod vitae sectabor iter. What path shall I take in life? A stranger appears and quotes another verse, Este non? Yes and no. Descartes wants to show the stranger where in the anthology this verse can be found. But the book disappears and reappears. Then the man, the book, and the whole dream dissolve. Descartes wakes up bewildered. He interprets the dreams as having a supernatural origin. The dictionary in the third dream represents the sciences gathered together in their sterile disconnection. The poetry collection marks the union of philosophy with wisdom. And the verse, What path shall I take in life? That's his mission. He believes God has shown him his purpose, the unification of all science through the method of reason. He's so convinced of this divine endorsement that he'll later make a pilgrimage to the Holy House of Loreto in Thanksgiving. 18 years will pass before the world sees the details of this vision, but the seed is planted. In a stove-heated room in Bavaria, modern philosophy begins. The next several years are a blur. We know almost nothing about his whereabouts from 1619 to 1625. Some evidence suggests he was in France in 1622, when property he'd inherited was sold, proceeds that would provide him a simple income for years. There's speculation he visited Italy between 1623 and 1625. Then he surfaces in Paris in 1625. His notes reveal he's in contact with Father Mersenne, a member of the Order of Minims. This friendship will become the backbone of Descartes' intellectual life. Mersenne is what historians call the Secretary of Learned Europe, a man with a sprawling correspondence network extending across the entire continent. When Descartes eventually moves to the Netherlands, Mersenne becomes his main correspondent. 146 letters from Descartes to Mersenne survive. That's about a quarter of all Descartes known correspondence. Mersenne provides books, fresh information, editorial services, and endless intellectual stimulation. 1628, a pivotal moment. Descartes gives a talk in Paris. The alchemist Chandu claims that probabilities are as good as certainties in science. Descartes publicly demolishes this argument and demonstrates his own method for attaining certainty. Cardinal Pierre de Bérulle is in the audience. Bérulle had founded the Oratorian Teaching Congregation in 1611 as a rival to the Jesuits. Many scholars speculate that Bérulle urges Descartes to write a metaphysics based on the philosophy of St. Augustine as a replacement for Jesuit teaching. Whatever the motivation, within weeks, Descartes makes a radical decision. He leaves France for the Netherlands, Protestant Netherlands, and he takes great precautions to conceal his address. He won't return to France for 16 years. Why the Netherlands? He writes to a friend, I sleep here 10 hours every night without being disturbed by any care, and after my mind has wandered in sleep through woods, gardens, and enchanted palaces, where I experience every pleasure imaginable, I awake to mingle the reveries of the night with those of the day. The Dutch don't pry into his business. He can live as solitary and withdrawn as if he were in the most remote of deserts. But there's likely another reason he's avoiding the Inquisition. The Catholic Church has not been kind to new ideas, and Descartes knows his ideas are dangerous. His first stop is the University of Franeker, in the northernmost province of Friesland, April de Augustusstraat, 1629. He registers as a student, probably to use the library. He's working on optics and astronomy, gathering observational data on perhelia, false suns caused by ice crystals in the atmosphere. He tries to recruit a French lens grinder named Jean Ferrier to join him in Franeker, even promising him a cook who could prepare French food. The plan fails. Descartes moves on. June 26th, 1630. He registers at the University of Leiden, again probably for library access. He's attracted there because Jacob Golius, professor of mathematics, has just discovered an Arabic manuscript containing lost books of Apollonius of Perga's conics. Golius becomes a lifelong friend. Here's where things get interesting. Descartes starts writing a book, Le Monde, The World. It's his first attempt at a complete system explaining all the phenomena of nature, all of physics. He works on it for 4 years, from 1629 to 1633. During this time, he moves constantly. Dordrecht in 1628, Franeker in 1629. Amsterdam 1629 to 1630. Leiden in 1630. Amsterdam again 1630 to 1632. Deventer 1632 to 1634. Amsterdam 1634 to 1635. Utrecht 1635 to 1636. Leiden in 1636, then Egmond 1636 to 1638. 24 address changes in his years in the Netherlands. He keeps his location secret, uses Catholic priests as intermediaries to forward his correspondence. His motto, taken from Ovid, Bene qui latuit, bene vixit, who lives well hidden, lives well. Why all the secrecy? Because Descartes is a closet Copernican. His physics in the world assumes the heliocentric model. The Earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. This is heresy. The Catholic Church has made its position clear. June 22nd, 1633. Galileo Galilei is condemned by the Roman Inquisition for defending the Copernican system. Galileo is forced to recant his views and is placed under house arrest for the rest of his life. When Descartes hears this news, he's devastated. He writes to Mersenne in November 1633, expressing his fear that if he publishes The World, the same fate that befell Galileo will befall him. His book is ready for publication. 4 years of work. A complete physics explaining the entire universe. And he suppresses it, hides the manuscript. The World won't be published until after his death, in 1664. Descartes feared the Church, but he also hoped that eventually his physics would replace Aristotle's in-church doctrine. He played a long game, just not long enough, but friends keep pressuring him. Constantijn Huygens, the Dutch diplomat and polymath, urges him to publish something. Henricus Reneri, another close friend who teaches natural philosophy at Deventer and later Utrecht, needs a teaching text for his courses. Publish your dioptrics, they say. Publish your meteorology. Share your method with the world. 1635, something happens that grounds Descartes in human reality. A domestic servant named Helena Jans van der Stroom gives birth to a baby girl. Descartes is the father. The child is named Francine. She's baptized Protestant on July 28th, 1635 in Deventer. Unlike many moralists of his time, Descartes does not deprecate the passions. He defends them. When Francine dies of scarlet fever in 1640 Spasms, at age 5, Descartes weeps openly. He says losing her was the greatest sorrow of his life. Winter of 1635 to 1636. Descartes writes the final draft of what will become his first published work. He's living in Leiden. He's 39 years old. He divides the essay into 6 parts. The first part, his reflections on the sciences, autobiographical, his disillusionment with his education. The second part, the rules for his method. He describes being stuck in that stove-heated room in Germany, having no society to divert him. How he mused that accomplishments of single individuals are usually more perfect than group efforts. Cities and buildings are more beautiful when made according to a single plan than when patched together piecemeal. He resolves to let go of all his former opinions at once and rebuild them according to the exacting standards of his own reason. He formulates 4 rules. First, never accept anything as true unless it is evident. Avoid hasty conclusions. Second, divide any given problem into the greatest possible number of parts for simpler analysis. Third, start with the simplest objects and progress toward increasingly difficult objects of study. Fourth, Be circumspect and constantly review progress to ensure nothing has been omitted. Part 3, moral rules he's derived from this method. Part 4, the foundations of his metaphysics. This is where it happens. This is where he proves the existence of God and the human soul. This is where he writes the words that will echo through 4 centuries of philosophy. Part 5, summaries of his mechanical biology and physics. He describes Harvey's discoveries on blood circulation, making him the first French philosopher to discuss it. Part 6, an introduction to his meteorology and optics, explaining why this preface was necessary. But when exactly does he write Part 4? When does he actually commit, "I think, therefore I am," to paper? Here's what we know. In a letter to Mersenne dated March 1636, Descartes speaks of 4 treatises, all in French, with the general title, "The Plan of a Universal Science, which is capable of raising our nature to its highest degree of perfection." He's planning the book. The framework exists, but Part 4, the metaphysics, that's the heart of it. The EBSCO research database notes that the final draft was written in the winter of 1635 to 1636, but different sections were composed at different times. The autobiographical first parts came early, the metaphysics of Part 4 that came late. So let's reconstruct. It's sometime in the winter of 1635 to 1636, probably late in that period. Descartes is in Leiden, or perhaps nearby. He's constantly moving between Leiden and Egmond and other locations. He has his routine down. He sleeps 10 to 12 hours a night, rises late, around 11 a.m. or noon. Those late morning hours in bed are his concentrated intellectual effort for the day. He mingles the reveries of the night with those of the day. After an early lunch, he takes a walk or meets friends. After supper, he handles correspondence. He makes sure not to overexert himself. He believes idleness is essential to good mental work. 24 hours before he writes the Cogito, what's going through his mind? Galileo, the image of Galileo on his knees before the Inquisition. Descartes has suppressed the world for over 2 years now. 4 years of work hidden in a drawer. He's terrified of what the church might do to him, but his friends keep pushing him. Publish something to show the world your method, and he knows they're right. He has something important to say, something that could change how humanity thinks about knowledge itself, but how to say it safely, how to present ideas that are, at their core, revolutionary, without being condemned as a heretic. He decides to write in French instead of Latin. This is deliberate. Latin is the language of scholars and theologians. French is for everyone. Good sense is of all things in the world the most equally distributed, he'll write in his opening. He wants to reach people with good sense, including women. He wants to teach them to think for themselves. He tells a Jesuit that he's written so that even women should be able to understand it. This is not an insult. In the 1630s, educating women is considered progressive. Descartes believes everyone can tell true from false by the natural light of reason. He decides to call it a discourse, not a treatise. As he tells Mersenne in February 1637, he doesn't intend to teach the method, only to speak about it, less authoritative, less threatening. He presents his entire philosophy as a kind of autobiography, just one person's journey to finding truth, not prescriptive, not dogmatic. Just, here's what I did, and now he's facing Part 4, the metaphysics, the foundation. He has to prove that certain knowledge is possible, but how? His method requires that he doubt everything that can be doubted. Everything that isn't absolutely certain must be treated as false. Senses deceive us. A stick appears bent in water. How can he trust anything his senses tell him? Dreams feel real while we're having them. How does he know he's not dreaming right now? And here's the terrifying possibility. What if there's an evil demon, supremely powerful and cunning, who has employed all his energies to deceive me? The hypothesis is radical. It's not in the final discourse on the method exactly this way. He'll develop it more fully in his Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641. But the seed of it is here. If such a deceiver exists, then Descartes can't trust anything, not the external world, not mathematics, not even his own body. Everything could be an illusion. He's sitting in his room, probably mourning, probably still in bed, as was his habit. His mind is working through the doubt, systematic doubt, methodical doubt. Not the doubt of a skeptic who throws up his hands and says, "We can't know anything." The doubt of a builder who demolishes an old structure to lay a new foundation, and then it hits him. The demon can deceive him about everything: the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds. The demon can make him believe he has hands and eyes and flesh and blood when he has none. But there's one thing the demon cannot do. The demon cannot deceive a mind that doesn't exist. For Descartes to be deceived, Descartes must exist. The very act of doubting proves there is something doing the doubting. Je pense, donc je suis. I think, therefore I am. Or more precisely, I'm thinking, therefore I exist. The words flow onto paper. In French, because he wants everyone to understand. But immediately afterwards, I noticed that whilst I thus wished to think all things false, it was absolutely essential that the I who thought this should be somewhat. And remarking that this truth, I think, therefore I am, was so certain and so assured that all the most extravagant suppositions brought forward by the skeptics were incapable of shaking it, I concluded that I might, without scruple, accept it as the first principle of the philosophy of which I was in search. This is it, the Archimedean point, the fixed foundation upon which all other knowledge can be built. Even if everything else is illusion, even if an evil demon controls every perception, I exist. I am a thinking thing. Cogito ergo sum. He keeps writing. Having found this one certainty, he works backward. If he knows he exists because he thinks, and he sees clearly that to think it is necessary to be, then he can assume as a general rule that the things which we conceive very clearly and distinctly are all true. He has a criterion for truth, clarity, and distinctness. From here, he builds to God. He's a finite, imperfect being who doubts. But he has an idea of something infinite and perfect. Where did this idea come from? A finite mind cannot generate an idea of infinity from itself. Therefore, the idea must come from something actually infinite. God. God exists. And because God is perfect, God would not deceive. Therefore, Descartes can trust his clear and distinct ideas about the external world. The evil demon hypothesis is defeated, not by denying the demon's existence, but by proving God's. A perfect God wouldn't allow a perfect deceiver. The doubt is dissolved. He writes all of this in part 4. Then he continues to part 5, his physics, his biology. But he's careful. He doesn't present his cosmology as truth. He presents it as a fable. He describes how the world would be if his assumptions on the nature of God were true. A speculative portrait, he can present his theories, suggest their reasonableness, yet not commit himself to their ultimate validity. He short-circuits any lengthy scholastic disputation. He avoids the trap that caught Galileo. The manuscript is complete. Now comes publication. Descartes initially considers giving the manuscript to the Elsevier publishing house, then to a Parisian printer. But ultimately, he deals with Jan Mayer, a bookseller and printer established in Leiden. The payment terms are unusual. Descartes receives 200 authors' copies instead of money. He wants to distribute the book himself, to control who sees it. The book will be printed anonymously. His name appears nowhere on it, another layer of protection. If the church objects, he can deny authorship, or at least have plausible deniability. June 1637. The book appears. Discours de la méthode pour bien conduire sa raison et chercher la vérité dans les sciences. Plus la dioptrique, les météores, et la géométrie qui sont des essais de cette méthode. Discourse on the method of rightly conducting one's reason and seeking the truth in the sciences, and in addition, the optics, the meteorology, and the geometry, which are essays in this method, published in Leiden, anonymously. Descartes is 41 years old. He's been working toward this moment for 18 years, since that night in the stove-heated room in Bavaria. And now his method is public. His metaphysics is public. 4 words are loose in the world. I think, therefore I am. The reaction is mixed. Descartes distributes copies to scholars across Europe. He sends copies to Louvain University, hoping that professors there will begin lecturing on his philosophy. It backfires. Liebert Froidmont, professor of sacred scripture, passes a very stern judgment on the discourse, especially on the dioptrics. Vopiscus, Fortunatus, Plemp, professor of medicine and once Descartes' friend, becomes one of his greatest foes, but the book spreads, it attracts attention. It's written in French, so it reaches beyond the scholastic audience. The common people can read it. Women can read it. Within years, even though published anonymously, all of Europe knows who wrote it. In 1641, Descartes publishes Meditations on First Philosophy in Latin, developing the arguments from Part 4 in much greater depth. This time, he includes the evil demon hypothesis explicitly. He has Mersenne gather objections from other philosophers, Thomas Hobbes, Pierre Gassendi, Antoine Arnauld, and he publishes these objections alongside his replies. He wants to show he can defend his ideas against the best minds in Europe. In 1644, he publishes Principles of Philosophy, a Latin textbook intended to replace Aristotelian textbooks in universities. He dedicates it to Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, with whom he's developed his moral philosophy through correspondence. He still dreams that his physics will be taught in Jesuit schools like La Flèche, but the dream is fading. His works are placed on the Index of Prohibited Books in 1663 after his death, but the threat was always there during his lifetime. The controversies multiply. At Utrecht, the Calvinist theologian Gisbertus Voetius attacks Cartesian philosophy. Descartes' follower Henricus Regius is confined to teaching medicine, forbidden to teach anything Cartesian. Voetius rises to become university rector. At Leiden, a similar pattern. Descartes fears being expelled from the country and seeing his books burned. He writes to the Prince of Orange seeking protection, and through all of this, he keeps to his routine: 10 hours of sleep, late rising, morning meditation, vegetarian diet, mostly, rarely drinks wine, walks in the afternoon, correspondence in the evening. He moves between Santpoort, Leiden, Endegeest, a castle near Oegstgeest that still exists today as a psychiatric hospital, and finally Egmond Binnen from 1643 to 1649. Then comes the invitation that will kill him. Queen Christina of Sweden. She's 22 years old in 1649, one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe. Brilliant, ambitious. She wants Stockholm to become the Athens of the North. She's been corresponding with Descartes through the French ambassador Pierre Chanou. She's read his meditations. She presses him on moral issues, on the absolute good. In February 1649, she invites Descartes to join her court in Stockholm. He has reservations. He's comfortable in Holland. His routine is established. The northern climate of Sweden terrifies him, but she's persistent. In July, he finally accepts. September 1649, Descartes arrives in Stockholm. It's one of the coldest winters in memory. He's lodged in the French embassy, a cold and drafty building near the palace, and then the Queen drops the bomb. His lessons will be at 5 a.m., 5 in the morning. Descartes, who has slept until nearly noon his entire adult life, who believes his most productive thinking occurs in those late morning hours in bed. Queen Christina gives him 6 weeks to adjust to the new schedule and new environment. He uses the time to work on plans for a Swedish academy. He presents these plans to Christina in early 1650, but they have no chemistry. After a couple of visits, it becomes clear they don't like each other. January 1650. Descartes is waking before dawn, walking through the frozen streets to the palace. The cold is so extreme, he later writes, that in such temperatures, even men's thoughts must freeze like the water. Protocol requires he remain standing throughout their sessions, his head bare. He's 53 years old. He's never been in robust health. That persistent cough from childhood, probably tuberculosis, never fully went away. February 1st, 1650, Ambassador Chanute falls ill with a respiratory illness that progresses to pneumonia. Descartes is living in the embassy. He may have nursed his friend. February 2nd, 1650, Descartes becomes ill. He tries to treat himself with a medication of his own devising, liquid tobacco suspended in heated wine. It doesn't work. He's fevered, congestion in his lungs, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain. The Queen sends her Dutch physician, Jan van Wullen, to treat him. Van Wullen later writes that Descartes had increased skin pigmentation and hematuria, blood in the urine. These aren't typical symptoms of pneumonia. In the 1980s, Theodor Ebert of the University of Erlangen will propose that Descartes was poisoned with arsenic, perhaps by a Catholic priest, opposed to his controversial views on transubstantiation. The theory remains disputed. February 11th, 1650. 10 days after falling ill, René Descartes dies. He's 53 years old. As a Roman Catholic in Protestant Sweden, he's buried in a graveyard mainly used for unbaptized infants at Adolf Fredrik's Church in Stockholm. 16 years later, his remains are exhumed and taken to France. During the French Revolution, his bones are moved to an Egyptian sarcophagus at the Museum of French Monuments. When plans are made to rebury him in an abbey, officials discover that most of his bones, including his skull, are missing. His skull eventually ends up in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, where it remains today. The death is tragic. The man who built his entire philosophy on the certainty of his own existence dies in a foreign country, his body disassembled and scattered across Europe. But his ideas survive. I think, therefore, I am 4 words, 24 hours to write them down. But decades of doubt, fear, suppression, ease, and intellectual struggle behind them. Those 4 words didn't just establish the foundation of modern philosophy. They shifted the entire axis of Western thought. Before Descartes, philosophers attempted to describe the world as it is. After Descartes, the question became, what can we know in the first place? He realized that we perceive everything through the notions formed in our own heads, that we can never truly understand anything objectively. Epistemology, the study of knowledge itself, was born. The Cogito emancipated the individual from religious doctrine and equipped humanity with autonomous reasoning. It said, you don't need the church to tell you what's true. You don't need Aristotle. You don't need tradition. You have reason. You can think for yourself. And the very act of thinking proves you exist. This thought sparked the Age of Enlightenment, the intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. It influenced Isaac Newton's physics. It shaped Spinoza's monism and Hobbes' empiricism. It provided the foundation for John Locke's political philosophy and eventually for the democratic revolutions of the 18th century. And it all started with a sickly boy who was allowed to sleep late because his teachers thought he might die. If you value documented philosophy and intellectual history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual. Using sources from the Adam and Tannery complete edition of Descartes' Oeuvre, published in Paris between 1897 and 1913, the definitive scholarly source containing all his letters and manuscripts, and from Stephen Gaukroger's Descartes, an intellectual biography published by Oxford's Clarendon Press in 1995, the most comprehensive modern analysis of his philosophical development. Now, back to the information. That room in Leiden, or wherever he was when he wrote Part 4, that was the moment when centuries of philosophical tradition crumbled and something new emerged. Descartes didn't just doubt his education, he doubted his senses, he doubted mathematics, he doubted his own body. He imagined the worst possible scenario, an omnipotent deceiver manipulating every perception, and he still found bedrock, one thing that couldn't be false. The fascinating irony is that Descartes, the champion of reason, started with a dream. Those 3 dreams in Bavaria in 1619, he interpreted them as divine revelation, God showing him his path. The man who would be called the father of rationalism, the founder of the mechanistic worldview, believed God spoke to him through sleeping visions, and he made a religious pilgrimage in gratitude. And there's another irony. The man who said the thinking mind is the one thing we can be certain of, the man who separated mind from body in what became known as Cartesian dualism, this man was killed, arguably, by his own body's frailty, that sickly constitution that gave him permission to sleep late, that gave him the habit of morning meditation, that made possible the Cogito itself. It finally caught up with him in the Swedish cold. Or consider this. Descartes kept his address secret for 20 years. He used intermediaries for his mail. He moved 24 times. He published anonymously. He suppressed his most important work for fear of the Inquisition. He framed his physics as fable to avoid condemnation. All this hiding, all this fear, and he still died away from home, his body eventually scattered, his skull displayed in a museum. He who lived well hidden did not die well hidden, but the words survived. Je pense, donc je suis. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Those 4 words are still debated today. Philosophers argue about whether it's really an argument or just an insight, whether thinking necessarily implies existence, or whether Descartes smuggled in assumptions. Whether the evil demon hypothesis actually proves what he claims it proves. Jim Stone of the University of New Orleans argued in 1993 that Descartes never really offers a logical justification for the connection between thinking and existence. Why is I think therefore I am sufficient, but I suffer therefore I am is not? But these objections don't diminish the achievement. Descartes didn't need to be right about everything. He needed to change the conversation, and he did. Before the discourse on the method, philosophy was about authority and tradition. After it, philosophy was about individual reason and methodical doubt. Before the Cogito, certainty came from God and church. After it, certainty came from the thinking self. And all of this traces back to one moment, one night before he wrote it down. A man alone in a room, terrified of persecution, grieving a suppressed manuscript, pushing himself to doubt everything, absolutely everything, until he found one thing he couldn't doubt. That moment didn't come from certainty. It came from fear, from doubt, from intellectual desperation. The father of modern philosophy built his system not from confidence, but from crisis. And maybe that's why it resonates 400 years later, because we all know what it's like to doubt everything we've been taught, to wonder if we can trust our senses, to question whether anything is really real. Descartes didn't give us certainty about the world. He gave us certainty about one thing, ourselves. The act of questioning proves the questioner exists. The process of doubting proves the doubter is real. And that was enough. That was the foundation. René Descartes, born 31st of March, 1596, in La Haye, France, died 11th of February, 1650, in Stockholmhorst, Sweden. 53 years of life, 20 plus years in hiding, one night of dreams in a stove-heated room. 4 years of suppressed manuscripts. 24 hours before writing down the words that changed everything. I think, therefore I am. The man doubted everything. Everything except that one truth. And from that truth, he rebuilt the world. His skull sits in a museum in Paris. His philosophy sits in every university on earth. His words sit in the mind of anyone who has ever stopped to ask, how do I know I'm real? You think, therefore you are? Cold? Truth? Existence?